Module 22.2, solving equations by completing the square. We're going to modify this slightly because in Algebra 1 you really don't have to know completely how to solve by completing the square, but you do need to understand the process of how to complete the square. So that's going to be our main focus. We are going to do a couple of problems where you solve by completing the square, just so that you've seen it, but I'm more concerned that you know how to complete the square. Not for Algebra 1 again, it's not an ideal method of solving. However, in Algebra 2 it will be necessary because you'll use it when you do graphing quadratics. So we're going to go, how do you complete the square? So we have one year term problem here. They give us x squared plus 12x. And what we're trying to do is make it a perfect square trinomial. So this refers back to Module 21.3 where we did the special case of a perfect square trinomial. So in essence what we're looking for is we're looking to see what goes right here. What is our C? So how do you do that? Well, there's a couple things that need to take place. First, that always has to be a leading coefficient of 1. If it's not, then you've got to change that, and we'll do an example of that here in a minute. But if that's a 1, you're going to take this middle term, your b, going to write it down, and you're going to take half of it. Once you take half of it, we get positive 6. Then what you're going to do is you're going to square that. 6 squared is 36, and that becomes our C. That's how you complete the square. Now, this process that I just wrote down, these steps, this is going to be something you want to learn to copy every time, even when you're solving in Algebra 2 by completing the square or just completing the square process itself. It's something that you want to repeat. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the next year term problem where we're going to actually solve a couple of these. Now, in order to solve, we have to complete the square, so you're going to see that process again on how to complete. Now, something different that is with solving by completing the square is you don't want the equation equal to 0. So you're going to see right here it's equal to 11. So what we're going to do, we're going to rewrite the problem. X squared minus 10x plus C. We got to figure out what that C is. Equals 11. But I've got to do plus C because it's an equation. Whatever I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. Now, how do I figure out that C again? We're going to take our B value right here. Now, again, reminding you, this always has to be a 1 on the leading coefficient. So we take half of, so we take our B and divide by 2. That's going to be negative 5. I'm going to square that, and that gives me 25. That's my C. So I add 25 here, but again I have to add 25 over here. Now what I've done is I have now created a perfect square trinomial. That's a square, they're both positive. Remember we said take the square root, but in this case if you write this step down right here, it's already going to be factored for you. That's now going to factor as x, and all you do is look at that middle term right there, minus 5 squared, equals, then I have to add this over here, which is 36. Now we're back to problems like we did in the previous module. How do I get rid of the square? I take the square root of both sides. So that's going to give me x minus 5 equals, now remember, whenever you're solving and you take the square root, you always have two cases, plus or minus, so we get plus or minus 6. Then I have to do my two cases, so I have x minus 5 equals 6, x minus 5 equals negative 6. Solve, so I add 5 to both sides, and here I get x is 11. Add 5 over here. Here I get x is negative 1. So there are my two solutions. So now what we're going to go to a case when the is not a 1. So we're going to skip ahead to problem 8, and this will be the last one we solve because again I'm probably going to modify the assignment here. I'm not as concerned about solving so much as I am about knowing how to complete the square. But again, we want to show how to solve, so this will give you a chance to go back and watch. So when that leading coefficient here is not a 1, by the way, you don't want to have it equal to 0, so you want your constant on the other side. But how do we get rid of that 16? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to divide everything by 16. So when we do that, we now get x squared minus x equals 5 over 16. Then I've got to do plus something, that's c. Now how do I get that? Now remember right here there's a 1. So we bring that down, so we're going to divide that by 2. We do that, we get negative 1/2. Square that. Now in this case you want to leave it as a fraction. Do not change it to a decimal. So what I end up with here is 1/4. So I got 1/4. Here I have 1/4. So now I'm going to factor this. Again, it's easy, it's x. I just have to look at that middle term. That's a negative 1/2 squared equals. Now I have to add these. Now you may have to get your calculator. Just remember you got to get a common denominator, which would be 16, which means this has to be multiplied by 4. So if that's 4 plus 5, that would be 9. So I end up with 9/16. Now I take the square root of both sides. So I get x minus 1/2 equals plus or minus, remember 2 cases. Square root of 9 is 3, square root of 16 is 4. So here we're dealing with square roots again and all this stuff. Then I have to do my 2 cases, and I'm going to write it over here to the right. So I have x minus 1/2 equals positive 3/4. So I add 1/2, and I end up with x equals 5/4. That's one solution. I have to do my other case, x minus 1/2 equals negative 3/4. Add 1/2 to both sides. And if I do that, I get x is a negative 1/4. So those are my 2 solutions. So again, that's how you solve by completing a square. Again, I'm more concerned with the process. In this case, we're going to skip the word problem. We're going to go the evaluate or homework practice, and I'm going to do a couple here because I'll probably give you a handout for this particular homework. I may have you do some of the problems in the book, but let's complete the square for number 1. So plus what? So what I do, I had to take the b term, 26, divide by 2, and that would be, so now that's going to give us a 13, positive 13 squared, which is 169. So there's our C, 169. So let's go over here to number 4. So again, we do the same thing. We take our B, which is negative 24, divide that by 2. It's going to give us negative 12 squared, and that's going to give us 144. And there's our C. So completing the square is not a hard process, especially when that leading coefficient's a 1. So hopefully you've learned how to complete the square. Again, we'll probably modify this assignment quite a bit. I may give you a handout for this one rather than just doing the book work, but I'll see you again in class.